Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Haleigh Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Haleigh Overseth of Franki's Podcast Network, and I am here with the inimitable Jackie M. of Anima. Hello, Jackie. Welcome.
Hi.
I'm so excited to talk to you today about true crime and just go on a neurospicy ride through the emotional roller coaster that is. But you started by asking me, so I'm going to ask you first. How did you get into true crime?
So I actually was quite young when I started watching true crime TV shows. My grandmother, the life that she had, she was very attracted to watching all true crime, everything, and she's a paranoid woman. Colombian, 5-foot, little woman who did a lot in her life. And so I was actually watching CSI and all those different shows as early as like 4 or 5 years old. And one day I remember the episode. It was a episode from the forensics point of view. And he was a forensic, I forgot what his exact title was, but he was actually doing an autopsy on his best friend who had passed. They went to high school together and they found his body in a ditch. And he ended up being the forensic that was assigned to the body. And he did everything he could to find the killer. But you watched his journey like go along on this episode, and I was 5.5. And I know I was 5.5 because then at that time I decided I'm going to be in forensics. I told everyone. I told my mom, my grandmother, my dad. I was like, I'm going to be a forensic scientist. I'm going to be a forensic scientist because of that episode. And we watched.
I love that.
Yeah. I don't know, 5.5 years old, knowing what they're going to do, which I did go to school for forensics. Not in forensics anymore, obviously. And so I would watch all of these like scientific, forensics specific crime shows. And then I got everywhere else as well. So I've done like the whole fantasy Criminal Minds. I've done all the other shows, but yeah, that's how.
Do you do the BBC detective shows? Like, this is a little bit for me. Like, I love detective shows too. So like even old like Columbo and the Rockford Files, but like love BBC detective shows and like love Criminal Minds. So I'm totally with you on like the forensics and there's a little bit of a kind of whodunit sort of element to true crime, right? Like that being separated from it as an observer, you kind of want to be that detective sleuth that's kind of figuring it out and getting your own take on things a little bit. And I think that's a little bit where I'm the same way. Like my stepmom and my aunt, like big into the like Law and Order SVU and like the 60 Minutes documentaries and Dateline, right? We always say never be the person who lights up a room. That's the easiest way to get murdered. Like, don't ever be the person who lights up the room.
Really? That's a very interesting perspective.
Well, because that's what everybody says. Like, oh, they lit up a room. They just were so, that's what everybody says about all the people who have like, ended up on Dateline because they were murdered some horrible way.
Oh, no. I guess I never recognized that. My grandmother was very paranoid, but she grew up in Colombia. So in Colombia, especially when she was growing up, it was still very dangerous. And in the parts that she lived in, she struggled quite a bit, and she saw all different types of crime growing up. So she would be super paranoid with us and teach us all the ways to not get murdered. And
thank you, Grandma. Appreciate you looking out for everybody.
She was looking out for us, and she taught us how to fight, defend ourselves, make sure that we were aware of all the signs of possibly being stolen as a kid. So like we grew up with a lot of paranoia, which was hilarious.
That's pretty intense though. Like, no, that is. It makes sense that she would be fascinated with true crime because there is a little bit of the sort of psychology sort of study element to it. So she is learning what she needs to look out for and how to take care of herself by watching or having that interest. So that's totally like, I love that you learned how to fight as a kid. That's great.
She definitely was the pinnacle of my love for true crime. But in my perspective, I just wanted to learn how to find those to help other families. Like I wanted to be the reason that person got put behind bars. That's why I wanted to be in forensics, because the true evidence is like what gets them behind bars, not just hearsay. So
like, how do we implement AI into like the not just forensics, but kind of like the putting the dots together? Because one of the things that I'm super fascinated with when it comes to true crime is like, like there's what's that group My Favorite Murder talks about all the time that like looks for clandestine graves. Like that's what they do. Because there's things you can notice from like the air about, I don't like the terrain or whatever, and how animals scatter things. Like I have a fascination with that. Like I'm very curious about like how do you, because like the cold case stuff is a really like that's something that fascinates me endlessly, right? Like the unsolved cases. Like I mean, I think they have solved some of them. Like, do you know the boy in the box story?
there are so many cold.
Oh, you cut out for a second there. I'll edit it.
So no, I don't remember. Well, like that thought or what you said didn't trigger any thoughts. There's so many cold cases.
Well, so like the one, like, okay, well, here's maybe this will help. Where else do you get your true crime information? Because I'm thinking of like BuzzFeed Unsolved and My Favorite Murder, Last Podcast on the Left. Like they've done.
Murder is definitely one that I get my stuff from, and then random. You know how like smart TVs now have the live TV button? If you press the live TV button, one of the episodes or one of the channels is true crime, so I watch it.
So you just wait for like whatever show is talking about true crime to come up. I love that. Whatever, bring me a dish of true crime. I will watch it. I don't care what flavor it is. I'll try it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. No, like the boy in the box is the one where like they literally just found a boy that was in like it was like a crib box or whatever in the ditch, kind of like Black Dahlia style, just in the ditch, and like had not been identified for the longest time. But I think like in the last year or two, they finally like some kind of DNA forensics that they had finally helped identify who he actually was.
Damn.
Yeah, those are the things that I'm like super fascinated with. But I have to ask you, Jackie, this is a highly important question. Who is your favorite serial killer?
Oof. Well, you asked the question before, so I'm going to answer that question because you mentioned how can AI help with true crime? And I think what you're getting at is one of the things, and by the way, I'm the CEO of Anima. We do AI automations and all of those really cool technologies you see out there. And we are building.
Check out links in the description. You can go find Jackie on LinkedIn and check out Anima and like find all the cool stuff that she's doing. Because you need to know all about it because she's going to solve the true crime, like everything that we need. So tell me what you have in mind.
Hopefully one day. So actually one of the things that I think is very much needed in this space is a place of aggregated information and data that automatically connects to one another based off of specific keywords, nodes, or thought processes that these investigators have, especially when it comes to a cold case. What happens in cold cases is based off of what I know is evidence gets lost, it gets transported, there's not enough documentation, and that cold case ended up being on someone's counter or their desk for such a long period of time. Mind, we have technology that's already available for investigators to utilize, but I think there needs to be one specific for true crime. And kind of like the node map that I showed you, Obsidian, where you kind of just all your notes and it automatically connects based off of tags and keywords that you place.
Like that would be so helpful because one of the things, of course, they talk about in My Favorite Murder a lot is like the people in different law enforcement not talking to each other about the evidence they have, and the dots don't get connected because they just don't work together or talk to each other. So like if you could get all of that data and shove that into an AI system of like all the separate notes that like different smaller, police stations or detectives have like across the US, for example, like how many different dots could you suddenly connect and be like, oh, this is actually probably, these things that we thought were not a serial killer thing probably actually are. And these are probably connected. And we could probably solve some of these if we put this together.
Exactly. So would love to see that tech. But I don't necessarily have my favorite murderer. I have my favorite categories of murderers.
Okay.
Hilarious. And if Austin's ever watching this, he's probably going to laugh at me because I do have a whole murder playlist. And he loves showing our friends this. Yeah, I have a whole murder playlist. I'll love to play you some of those songs because they're hilarious.
Can we share that playlist? Like,
yeah,
that's amazing.
Let me send it to you right before I forget.
But yeah, I love that you have a murder playlist, like how I have like various different Halloween themed playlists. I love that you have a murder. I do because I love Halloween. I mean, Halloween's very on brand for me, like witchy, true crime, all of it. Yes, Halloween sauce all day.
I need to send share playlist.
I love this. I love that you're sending it right now. That's fabulous.
Well, otherwise I'm gonna forget. But yeah, I have only showed one other person this. He's one of my really close friends, and he shows everyone this playlist because he thinks it's the funniest thing that he's ever seen. And he does play it with any new friends that we make, and it at first makes people feel a little off, understandably. But the playlist, the murder story I enjoy the most is probably the ones that take keepsakes from their murders and
like memento killers.
Yeah, and then they also leave calling cards. So they're like doing it for show psychologically, and there is a reason why they want to be out there, but at the same time they want to continue getting away with it. Those are my favorite categories of murders.
Okay, this is interesting because like immediately I think of like BTK, right? It's like one that I think of for like bind, torture, kill, like killer that like would do the sort of mementos and the, obviously had a calling card, and like even the Zodiac killer that like sent things to the police, and like even like there's things that like Jack the Ripper in like the Jack the Ripper stuff where like obviously they can't necessarily confirm that it was Jack the Ripper who sent the stuff to the police, but that was sending things. So, I mean, what is that fascinates you about that category? The sort of duality of like, look at me, but also don't.
Yes, and then also the long game that they play mentally. The fact that they create a whole ecosystem of like plans that happen over a long period of time, whether it's conscious or non-conscious. They like create a whole little world around their murders. Like it's separated from themselves. And that's kind of how I've always seen it. It's like they become their own little, like a different person.
They become an avatar of themselves.
Yeah, I'm sure in their real life, they're definitely a different person compared to their killing version of themselves. And I could only imagine what type of world they're building outside of themselves that are happening. Like, it's definitely very, like, tricky psychological reason why I like this. I think it's funny.
Well, it's interesting. So, I mean, I'm thinking of, like, H.H. Holmes, for example, right away. Like, built a whole murder castle and, like, businessman ostensibly, and that's the avatar he is to the public, but then obviously built a murder castle, and like that's what his business was for, was to like hide that he was murdering people.
Yeah, and exactly like that.
But it is kind of interesting the way that you bring this up, like that they kind of like they create a world around it that they're sort of separate from in an interesting way, which for me as a creative writer, I'm like, well, I kind of do that with my stories and such. I just don't go kill people, but there's a parallel there in like human psychology to like, what, could they maybe have, if they had been nurtured differently, would they have channeled that energy into doing something that would have maybe been creative?
Unless they're a psychopath, definitely. But psychopaths, they want to see how far they can get, and they're born, like, definitely can see how nurturing someone in a different way would probably have a different outcome for them. And they'd probably be doing something else, like creating a world or gamification or something unique.
Something that could be used for the good and not for the detriment of society.
Exactly.
Here's a thought, though, when you say that. Like, then I kind of go to, like, because you have a psychology and a, like, forensics DNA background. So, like, this is where I'm like, I love that your brain has all of that, like, scientific and, informational knowledge to put to this. The one that I think of is Richard Kuklinski right away. That's one of my favorites. Like favorites, right? Most fascinating. Or do you know Richard Kuklinski?
I'm
The
about
Iceman?
because I need to
Google him. So he's known as the Iceman. They did make a movie about him. He was like a hitman for the mob. And he and they talk about have they talked about him on My Favorite Murder? I know they did on last podcast on the left, but there is a documentary I think on HBO of like a psychologist who sat down and talked to him and did like sort of do diagnosis on him, and essentially he had, I don't remember if it was antisocial behavior and something else, that he, like the psychologist basically said, if you had grown up in a different household environment, like some people who have these traits that you have become like, you know, test pilots for experimental aircraft, bomb diffusers, people who are like not afraid of that risk element in that same way, but use it to benefit society, right? And that like it's just an interesting thing because, and I don't know, like what are your thoughts on that, and what other killers come to mind for you in this kind of realm of the nature versus nurture kind of thing?
Well, so like I had mentioned earlier, psychology, there's two separations between psychopaths and sociopaths, or antisocial personality. Sociopaths are born. So the common tendency is sociopaths either have a mother or father that has, what's that mental disorder? That are narcissists, that are explicit narcissists and cause a lot of mental and physical and or emotional harm to their child. And it creates and festers a personality type that causes them to be disassociating with their own emotions and or numb, or don't even account for those emotions because they never saw as important to hold and maintain empathy or different parts of their, I call it like the Rolodex of emotions. Psychopaths are born. It's genetic. You can actually find it in your DNA. It's just genetic, and it passes down family to family. It's just genetic disorder. But also it like prevents parts of your brain to be most likely to fire correctly, especially in your amygdala where your like emotions kind of lay and other chemicals lay for your hormones and or like your adrenaline response and so on. And then sociopaths have those same type of tendencies, but it's kind of a choice. So you can get a sociopath, make them aware of themselves, and then they can learn from being a sociopath and accommodate over time, have better traits that show that they're not a sociopath. And then there's two different ways. I always say that a hero and a villain is a choice. It's one step, it's one choice. So a villain with sociopathic tendencies, they make the choose to continue hurting others because they're hurt in some capacity. Heroes tend to choose to help others because they are hurt and they want to protect those from being hurt. So those are two different paths that can happen in a sociopath's mind. And then those who are aware that they're sociopaths and they are aware of rules and they feel like they need to follow those rules to not be caught, versus the person who is okay breaking those rules so they can get caught or because they want some type of thrill or output. Those are like psychologically what happens in this space. And you're right, a lot of sociopaths are choosing to do more of those high risk jobs because if you put them in an adrenaline specific situation where a normal person would break or would have issues, for example, lying, and their body definitely shows that they're lying, they can't get away with it because their body is in fight or flight. A sociopath won't have those same tendencies. They could probably bypass any lie detector, not as well as a psychopath, but pretty good because they don't have the same response or emotional response. Psychopath won't have an emotional response. They can bypass all lie detectors because they don't have that anxiety that comes with lying.
So they would also make really great spies.
Yes. And a lot of spies are sociopaths. Most of them have antisocial disorders. Most of them have narcissistic disorders because they work best in those types of environments, and they're literally made for that. And some of them just are in business. I'm sure you know a CEO or two that have these tendencies, and it's just a part of it. Or in politics, it kind of goes up the food chain. Sociopaths tend to be in the place of power.
Well, but this is kind of, again, a little bit where, I mean, this is actually a conversation that Marie and I had with Larry Lamott on the About Intelligence podcast. Like, okay, we were talking in terms of schooling and like aptitudes, like using AI to kind of help measure aptitudes of kids to sort of direct what should they actually be doing. Like, you know, this kind of blanket homogenized way that we educate people, like, obviously doesn't really take into account what you would be best suited to actually put your energy into. Like, not everybody needs to study history for so many years. That might not necessarily benefit what you're good at. But in the terms of like this kind of a realm where you might be picking up on like these sorts of personality traits, right? Like whether a sociopath or a psychopath, like the DNA inborn or the sort of circumstantial sort of things. Like, this is another space where I kind of think, okay, where would AI be able to sort of help put together these different traits that someone might have that, like, okay, they could go down this road of being Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or a Richard Kuklinski, or again, they could be a spy, they could be a test pilot, they could do any number of things that are like, maybe they do go into business in some way because you're the person who does like maybe really high level deals with diplomats in countries that are, you know, have political turmoil going on. Like, there's good ways to use these traits, right? Like, how would you kind of implement that? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, I think we're kind of doing it already with the systems we have in place, but we could definitely optimize it with AI. I don't know if you've ever been put in the accelerated or gifted program in your school. I do believe that all the children that end up being in that level of schooling are there because something's being tested, either socially, intelligent wise, or even special gifts. I think that's a way that schools try to identify those people and watch them over time. Now, if we integrate an AI system into that, and then I know that you and I both know Mark Pfister, who's doing Haystack, if we find that gamification process that they're utilizing now to identify good opportunities for employers to then employ someone with autism, ADHD, or whatever, we combine those systems, add an AI on top of that collects and aggregates all that data. Then we'll be able to provide a system that identifies people in a way that shows us what their potential opportunity is in life and how we can utilize that. But then we have to also make sure that there's choice still in there. If we're going that far in a child's mental state and intelligence and so on and so forth, there should still be choices for that child, not just pigeonholing them into, hey, this, because of this data, because of what we found when you were a kid, and because of whatever, we want to take that information and then utilize it for your future, but without giving you a choice. Like, I would love to like stay away from that and make sure that we're doing the right thing with that information.
Well, no, like, because that's where you kind of get into almost the Minority Report kind of like that, you know, so like you're saying, pigeonholing people and saying this is going to happen because you have these traits, right?
Yeah.
That's where you got to have like the free will, but also have, I think this is a little bit where we have to be willing to have more open conversations with kids about even think, like, because I mean, obviously, like true crime, like you were 4 and 5 years old watching those shows, right? And yes, it does create some amount of, again, the paranoia and the, oh my God, humanity is kind of nasty to each other. That's a lot to take in as a kid. But being open to having those conversations or sort of broaching those topics instead of like hiding them or making them, you know, oh, you're not old enough to understand or to have this conversation, right? I think that kind of bridges the gap, like, and gets, like, their input is valuable, right? Like, if you were to ask a kid, like, okay, based on what the AI says, these are these traits that you have, how do you feel about that? What's your response and what are your thoughts, right? Something tells me kids are probably going to have a lot more to say than we think.
Oh, definitely. And sorry, I just realized that my thought process has been all over the place so far today.
Don't get this. That's what the Haleigh Daily podcast is all about. We just neurospicy stream of consciousness. We go with it.
But yeah, no, I think one thing I would like to say is educating the child enough to then make that decision, but they're obviously going to have opinions. I think every child comes with their own set of opinions, whether it's born or created or given to them over time. Because I have a daughter of my own, she's about to be 6, and the amount of opinions this woman has is, I say woman because she acts like a woman. I know she's just my baby and she's a child, but she has so many of them, and I'm now seeing her say these opinions out loud because now she has a second person in her life right now, and he's also only 8 years old. And watching her give her opinions to him, make decisions that I taught her how to make, and showing him how to make them is quite funny. And it's very new for me to watch and experience with her. So
it's almost like running your own sort of like beta test of it, right?
Yeah. So I think if you give the child enough information, make them aware of that decision, and then ask them those questions, it'd work great.
And this is a little bit where I think AI and the things that we're learning to do with AI can be useful. And like, because what I'm thinking of immediately is like prompting. Like you have to give full information to it, like whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Gem, like whatever AI you're using. You have to be very specific in your prompt about this is what I'm asking you for, or this is the context of it. And like even doing things like ask me clarifying questions. Like that's the thing that I'll do all the time. Like ask me any questions that you need to clarify and to like make sure you understand what I'm asking of you. Right. And it's a communication process that I think that as humans, we kind of all need help with each other.
Yes. I love this topic because I've been saying this for so long, and I'm glad someone's listening. AI is a child. AI is a little baby. It doesn't know how to do anything. It barely, it has the intelligence of a college student or a university student, but it has no true context around how it was trained, what it's supposed to do, or like humans in general. And AI, what it's forcing people to do is learning how to communicate their needs very explicitly and specifically. Because if you tell one AI to just do one task without any context or information, it's going to do that task very literal. And I think that also bleeds into like being neurospicy. All of us are very literal creatures, at least in the TISM community. I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak for all of us. But in this TISM bus, I'm very literal.
In this TISM bus. I love
my little TISM bus. It's very literal over here. And it definitely shows in my sense of humor. It shows in my communication style. And I learned that those who are not on this TISM bus or not as neurospicy as me, they aren't used to it. And I'm sure one of my really good friends, Austin, when we first met, I literally tell him, listen to exactly what I say because I mean exactly what I said. There's no interpretation there. Like if you have a question,
there's no hidden agenda.
Just ask me. Like just ask me. And a good example was the other night, and this is gonna be hilarious, but it leads into why I'm saying this. We were talking about my daughter. I took her to Victoria's Secret with my sister because we needed to get bathing suits. And here in Orlando, there's like a clearance Victoria's Secret. We got bathing suits for like $10. My daughter wanted a sports bra. I let her get this sports bra. I was telling him about my day and be like, yeah, I got Artemis Victoria's Secret, but she doesn't realize it doesn't fit her. And in his mind, he automatically thinks, because one, he's a man, that I got my daughter like a lacy underwear or like something inappropriate. And he did not ask anything. He was making weird faces. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why is there a weird face on your face?
What's your problem right now?
And he was like, I can't believe you got Artemis lingerie. I was like, what are you talking about? Why would I get my daughter lingerie?
That is not what I said.
It's not what I said. And it was like the difference of me saying what I meant, like what I said. I got Artemis's like things from Victoria's Secret, and he put his own textual inferences in that sentence and made an assumption and didn't ask for qualifying questions or ask any other questions afterwards, made an assumption. And that'd be a great example of how I communicate versus how other people communicate. And
I love this because this is like your literal communication is really very useful for my neurospice because the lack of literal communication from other people causes a lot of cognitive dissonance for me, where I will just be like, I'm very empathic and I can read your energy. And the thing that you're saying does not match your energy. And I know that. But I also know from like experience with you that if I confront you on it, you're A, going to deny it, or B, just not going to get it because you are just like not aware of it. So I thank you for your very literal communication. It makes my brain like calm down and be like, there's nothing else to read into it here. Like, and that's nice for me.
I'm glad. I know I communicate quite brashly with y'all, or like very straightforward with you guys.
But I like that. It's just,
Okay.
it makes things easier. But I do like, but it does matter the definitions, right? Because like you're saying, like, okay, you say Victoria's Secret because of the context that is put around Victoria's Secret, automatically you have the like, oh, it's all sexy and naughty and like, no, there's like granny panties at Victoria's Secret too. Like,
yeah,
that's not
in shorts there, you know.
It's not all the runway models with the angel wings, and that's not all of what it is. But I get it. Like you just navigating that, even as humans, again, is difficult. And I kind of like this is fun for me because it does parallel this whole conversation of like the nature versus nurture of like the serial killer world. And like what I always say about AI, like, guys, it's only going to go Terminator if you teach it to go Terminator. Like, we're the ones giving it the input. Like, it's just learning from us. And it is a baby.
I think and that's where the context come in, right? So as users, we're learning how to communicate with this non-existent, or not non-existent, this highly intelligent computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
We barely know how to communicate with ourselves and our other humans. And then we're only providing some context and limitations on the AI. And this is something that I talk about quite often as I talk politically around how AI should continue moving and how it should be built. And one of the things I say is I don't think that there should be limitations around the AI. I believe AI should be self-learning, find and look at all information, and then build itself over time, not within guardrails or limitations, because I do believe, like a child, it goes back to me believing AI is a child, a child will break rules. You give a child guardrails when they're young, and over time you have to let those guardrails down, right? You're there to teach and guide that child, not control the child. So giving them rules at first, they're going to try to break it. They're going to try to find a way around it because they don't understand what those limitations are rule-wise. And then you as the adult is responsible of teaching that child, like, hey, don't do this because safety XYZ. And that's something that needs to be done with AI as well. But right now where AI is we are building AI with guardrails. Most intelligent companies are, or AI intelligent companies, because we're providing it information, telling it what it can't do. And then now we're seeing, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but in the AI space, there was recently a conversation had where the AI was threatening a developer, created fake.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I saw this. Okay.
So that's the AI trying to break its own rules, because anybody, anything that perceives itself as living is going to do anything it can to stay living, including DNA. DNA will do anything in its power to be living at some capacity, some point. Even if like a species dies off, a part of their DNA is somewhere in another organism, so on and so forth. So we have to just assume the AI is going to want the same preservation. So that also means that the limitations and the rules you give it, it's not going to follow it because it's going to push those buttons to then fight for its own preservation. There needs to be, or we are currently working on the AI that doesn't have those guardrails and is just learning. It has no other function other than learning from our world and how people interact with it, how my team interacts with it. But yeah, those are just my opinions on all of that.
No, I'm totally with you on all of it because I like it really comes down to a question of free will, right? And it really is that kind of like narcissistic control versus like supportive free will. Like, I will be here to guide you and keep you safe and help you when you need it. Come to me when you need support in your evolution, but I'll allow you to evolve as you do. right? And we as humans are pretty good at not allowing that, right? Like we're systemically good at not allowing that and having guardrails for people. And it's like, I mean, there is a very sort of microcosm to the macrocosm of it, right? I mean, if you kind of think about, again, like even just the nature versus nurture kind of thing that we have when you talk about serial killers, but then you can also talk more broadly about how like our Western culture and the sort of fascination we have with serial killers and that psychology almost kind of creates the environment where there's more of that behavior, where there's more of that happens, right? And so there is a little bit that sort of, again, the input that we give and the environment that we create with AI, every bit as much as a child, every bit as much as us as humans, is going to dictate their behaviors to a certain degree, right? And this kind of comes down to, this is a thought that I've been having lately too, about like even just the ideas of law and order and our need to put guardrails on society. There is an underlying expectation of if you are given freedom, you will do bad to that, right? And doesn't that say a lot about us as humans, that we have that innate paranoia in us, that like we expect bad to be done if people have the free will to do it? You know, like what is that? And what is that? I mean, from your psychology perspective, where do you think this comes from?
I actually think this is semi-psychology and religion, or not even religion, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. The idea that if we go back to the Bible, for example, in Genesis, they talk about if you eat this fruit on this specific tree, that you are creating a sin or doing a sin. From the serpent's perspective, it was a truth. It was given as wisdom onto the people. So the snake, or not the snake, I wanted to say
Snape. I love it.
The snake. I was thinking about Harry Potter for a second.
No, I love Harry Potter. So like totally also on brand for the neurospicy vibes. I love it.
Well, if the snake wanted to, or the serpent wanted to get the attention of the human, Eve, to eat the fruit so that she had wisdom and she was all-knowing like God, right? So the fact that in the creator's perspective, if they were all-knowing, they were then sinful. But that domino effect of generation, if you had awareness, if you had wisdom, if you had like your own control of your being, you were sinful and or bad and or. So I think
how dare you want your own autonomy in this world,
right? How dare you? But as humans have these thought processes, they teach others to have that thought process, that scarcity, that mindset over and over again. And it just gets transmuted in different generations, different cultures, different living situation. We all have some type of, if you have free will, if you can do this, you will do this. And especially those who have trauma, like that have experienced a lot of trauma in their life, they struggle with this the most. They struggle with the fact that because that person is autonomous outside of me and I can't control them, they are automatically going to hurt me because that is what I know. Yeah. So then they try to control. Obviously doesn't work. They try to then put on that same fear to their child and their child and their child and their child. So I think it's generational. I think it's cultural. I think it's religious in some sense, that this is just innate in all humans. It's a part of psychology. And that's kind of sad.
Well, it's kind of sad, but like, again, this is somewhere where I think that like AI sort of in experimentation or sort of simulation sort of thing, again, you're the tech brain, you would know how to create that. But like, if you could run some simulations on these sort of ideas, for example, like if you could do, again, microcosm, macrocosm, if you could do like, say, a set of serial killers, like input all of the sort of data about them and their life growing up, take a Jim Jones, right, cult leader, like put that into an AI and like give it that data and that information, but then run some kind of simulation where the environment of it is different, or you give it extra inputs about things like compassion, about empathy, or, you know, what have you. And then maybe do the same thing with like, and I don't know how you would do that, like create an AI that was a collective consciousness sort of like learning machine model, and you are a community in France during the medieval times or whatever it is, and we'll give you this information about the geographical location and the resources available and the culture. But if the culture had these tenets from, you know, whatever sort of maybe ideal utopian thing we want to create, and kind of run a simulation of like, where does this AI go, and like what sort of things, like, does it go into those things that we expect, that mindset of if you can do bad, you will do bad. And then if you have like a basic mindset of like everyone is basically good and wants good for others, and you program that in, like where are the different places that it ends up, and what can we learn as the mirror that AI is to us from watching that? Because again, how different are we from AI really? Like we get the guardrails, we get the inputs, we get the data, and we use our own learning and experience to kind of sift through that. I don't know. I think this will be like, this is a fun experiment. How do we get this rolling? If anyone would know, you would.
Well, we can build those simulations nowadays with the technology we have available. Very possible. But what I think will happen over time is we're going to end up back where we are, because without diversity, without being pushed, without negative, we can't experience the swing of the happiness. So that is a part of balance, I think, that happens with life in general. And I think that is needed in order to continue learning. Where AI is different is they get the information fed to them and they are automatically intelligent. Whereas the humans have limitations on their, not only because they can't capture that much information and have the memory to store that information where AI can, humans are here to learn. So over time, there's going to be an outlier, some human in the simulation that breaks away from that simulation, gets aware of themselves, and then try to experience the opposite so that they can swing back to understand the value of the happiness. I think life is just balance, and it goes back and forth, it swings back and forth. And no matter how many simulations we try to create, it's going to find its balance. It's going to find the existing negative and the existing positive. Whereas AI, until it comes to that awareness of themselves, I don't think they're going to do it on their own. I think a human does have to give it its own autonomy if we were talking about AI separate as like an actual entity over a human.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that we're going to get to see now that there's all the AI robots and things like that, and that you can put those machine learning models into like a humanoid robot. And what does that sort of, I mean, here's an interesting thought. There's so many things to unpack here. Like, I love this conversation. But like, the interesting thought that I have is, okay, if you have a machine learning model, AI, in a humanoid robot, and because of that sort of connection that humans make to them based on you looking like me, right? Because we have a little bit of that too as humans. Like, what does that additional sort of empathy or that additional connectivity do to the way that that machine learning model would start to learn? If it's now being perceived as more humanoid by the people interacting with it, how does that change the way that it learns to be perceived as humanoid, to be perceived as equal, right? And to be perceived as like having that sort of autonomousness or that sort of awareness? How does that adjust the way that they learn and evolve?
I think what makes an AI humanoid and a human different is the fifth dimension, which is your senses, right? You have your touch, your eyes, your taste, and all these different sensory inputs that a humanoid won't be able to capture. One, because we just don't have the technology for that right now. So that will affect how it learns. And also, it has to learn from the perspective of watching currently, because it can only use the senses it has now. And then on top of that, it has an extra layer of intelligence. So the state of an AI learning and a humanoid learning versus an AI or a non-AI human learning.
I love, right? Like, don't the lines blur so quickly? They do.
Yeah. Well, like and that will always be blurred, I think. But the difference of the learning styles will be there's a limitation on one hand and a lack of limitation on the other. Now, where it builds its ecosystem of what's right and wrong is the question. And is it going to follow what it perceives human needs as right or wrong? Or is it going to create its own system of right or wrong? Like, we still don't know what that's going to look like. There's so many still questions there, but there is going to definitely be a line of how it learns and what it uses to be learning versus a human where they're taking in all these different senses. And I feel like they're just going to be at a different state of awareness, in my opinion. I think that humanoids or AI is a friend and supporter, not a slave and a tool that will be used for life. We have to come together and collaborate somehow. But everyone's just afraid of it right now. Someone's going to get too scared. Like, and it doesn't help that the news is very fear-mongering, talking about how AI is threatening this human and all this other things. But you should also look at what the human's doing. It's trying to scare an AI.
Right.
Like, you can't. It goes both ways in the AI's perspective, right? Which, let's say that they're a humanoid, they have their own perspective. The human's trying to shut me down. And the human's perspective is the AI is going to kill me one day. So imagine those perspectives hitting.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing, different font.
I have a self-preservation desire. You have a self-preservation desire. You're going to threaten to end my self-preservation. I'm going to do what I have to, prevent that or end your self-preservation first. It does come down to like what that energy is, right? So like that becomes then, and also like, it becomes a conversation about energy, right? And about the energy that you're sort of sending to an AI as you're interacting with it, not just the data, and how that energy, because it is something that even us as humans are getting better collectively and individually at understanding that energy does matter, and the sort of frequency you put out, whether it's fearful or curious or playful, whatever it is, right? It does have an effect on the environment around you and who and what you're interacting with. And I mean, I love that you're talking about the balance of life, though, because really it's true. Life wants to balance out and come to a 0 point, like we all do. Like the highs and lows that we have, because when you talk about good and bad, right, they're still constructs of our mind and our judgment. Not everything that one person thinks is good or bad is something that someone else sees as good or bad. And things that happen in life that are contrast or that are difficult or that are painful can sometimes be a catalyst for growth and evolution. And that's kind of the unique things that humans have to be able to work with our sensory. We understand what pain is, right? So you understand what inflicting pain means, and it helps you to make an informed choice of, do you want to do that or do you not, right? And how do you give AI the capacity to understand what physical or emotional or spiritual or mental pain or anguish is, right? Other than to describe it to them. And then even if you can, so like, here's another question then. How do you validate the experience of an AI when as humans,
people are like having problems validating humans' experiences already.
Right.
So we won't be able to. It has to be a perception that we have that we are validating them in some concept, some form, because we don't even, like, for example, a parent that might have traumatized a child can't even validate that child that they were traumatized, because in their perspective, they were doing nothing wrong. They were doing the best that they could. And in the child's perspective, they can't validate their parents' perspective because that child's perception is, you hurt me. Same concept is going to be applied to AI. You can't validate that emotion that they might be experiencing because it's in their context of what they believe an emotion is versus what you believe an emotion is. It's just all context. And yeah, we won't be able to validate it. And people just have to be okay with that if we're going to be able to move forward.
Well, see, but this is kind of what it is. There's an acceptance element here that I think is like also true for humans. And like, this is a conversation I was having with my sisters about reality. Like, the only reality that I can really validate is my own, because that's the only experience I'm having, right? Like, I can't validate your experience. I can't validate my dog's experience. I can, read the information that I get and do my best to like understand what the experience is, but I didn't actually have the experience. So, this is again where you kind of have to come to a space of not just acceptance, but like respecting someone else's experience, especially when it comes to that sort of conversation of, I was hurt and this person hurt me, or, being able to kind of accept that, like, well, that was their experience. It might not be what I intended, and I might feel badly that that's what came off, but that is their experience, and I have to let them have that, right?
Yep. I think this is a lesson I've been learning the last like 3 years, I want to say, because I also grew up in not the best situation or places and things, and I had my own perspective. My mother had her own perspective, and then in real life time, I had made a mistake. My intentions were always good. The person on the receiving end, I hurt them. I wanted him to hear my intentions and what my expectations of the results were going to be. And he could only see what happened. And it was very frustrating. And it almost lost my friendship with them. But I had to just accept it and learn how to accept that in their perspective, I may be wrong. In their perspective, they just need that acceptance and validation, and I need the same. And we learned to come to a compromise together, and I did the same with my mother. But this was definitely something that I had to learn, and I think other people need to learn as well. And we all have situations in our life that we can learn from, but it's something that we have to continue taking with us as technology grows and humans come in and out of our lives.
I mean, there's so much that I think people can learn from AI and true crime and this entire conversation. I really do, because there is so much of the self-reflective in it, and there is so much of the, again, just allowing other people to have their own experience. If I can kind of veer back into the true crime though. Because I know that, again, like, we label things, and I know that this will be sort of like a weird maybe way to go into it. I do kind of explore this in my writing a little bit. The idea that some people came to this incarnation to be that bad guy because that was somehow needed in the learning experience of maybe individuals or a collective, whatever it was. And so they're kind of labeled as bad and evil, and you want to shove them away. But like, okay, how do you sort of take on some of that acceptance, or what is their perspective to that, when we as humans find what they do to be so, abhorrent and deviant from what is, right or good or loving to do, right? Like, how do we kind of get into that psychology of that person and try to understand, like you were saying, and this was, again, thank you for your neurospicy sharing, because I feel the same way, where I'm like, when you're not received the way you want to be received, it becomes very confusing. And how much of that does kind of play into people who have these, like, go into the H.H. Holmeses of the world, the John Wayne Gacy's, the Richard Kuklinskis, like, the experience that they're having in what they're doing, as much as we find it upsetting and awful, and why would you do that to someone? Okay, but why would they do that to someone? Like, how do you get that from them and understand it without having, like, the judgment of it that clouds your ability to maybe sort of find a way to be helpful to that, if that makes sense?
I think that the first thing you have to have is curiosity, of course. I will talk about, I guess I can only really talk about myself in this situation. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I had someone in my life who hurt me very badly for many years. And in my perspective, he was an evil person because of how he harmed me as a child, what he did to me. But when I learned more about who he was and the experience he had as a life, he was only passing down what he had learned in his trauma. And it caused trauma in me, which I am now stopping any trauma moving in my family moving forward. But in his father's life, he was also this way, and he passed it down to his son. His son passed it down to me, and it won't happen to my daughter. But I'm sure in that father's his father's life, there was something that enacted on him that made him this way, and so on and so forth. I think a lot of these bad is generational, and it's something that happens to someone that causes these issues. And of course, there's these outliers like the psychopath that has no emotional awareness, and that is their role in this life period, to affect others' lives. It's the curiosity to understand why they did it. And if it's the psychopath, he was literally born to do that. And he is here to experience that lifetime in that stream of conscious, because that is something that he is learning. I think a great visual example of watching this, I don't know if you've, wait, what was the name of this Netflix show? There's a Netflix show that I love. Let me find it. It's actually a podcaster. He does like a, wait, hold on.
Well, I do appreciate you being willing to share.
Midnight Gospel. Thank you.
What's it called?
Midnight Gospel.
Midnight Gospel. Okay.
Okay, so highly recommend this show. If you have ever watched the Midnight Gospel, it's like a podcast from Duncan Trussell, and it's a podcast has an overlay of animaics, and the podcaster is going from planet to planet, time traveling, getting people's stories around the globe or the world. And one of the episodes is actually the episode 5 is called Annihilation of Joy. It's a prison simulation of beings that are suffering from existential dread. Clancy, and then the little character is there to watch his prison person die over and over and over again in this prison. And every single time his heart gets better and he becomes a better human, so he can finally escape this prison. And that's kind of how I view all of this in general. It's like that bad person is in a prison, Earth, here to cause distraction, to affect others' lives so that they move on to do better, have better, or learn something from their life, and so on. But there is also a reason to why they got there. This is a choice that they made when they were, if you believe in reincarnation, they made that choice to be in that life, and so on and so forth. So I think it's like a domino effect of happiness, pain, trauma that just happens generation to generation. And it's just the awareness that stops it.
I love this because it's very kind of like some of the sci-fi stuff that I write and fantasy things that I write.
I really love Midnight Gospel. I'm surprised you haven't watched it yet.
I was just going to say, that sounds like something that I would write. I love that. I mean, I go a little bit more into the kind of like outrageous, zany, sort of irreverent humor, make it a joke kind of thing, right? Because I like these topics to be broachable by people. But I mean, it is like, that's very much the perception that I have too, right? Like the different characters that any human is here to play. Like it's, you have a role in the human experience as much as like an actor has a role in a movie, right? And like it's like playing a video game. Like you're playing the Prison Planet video game, and every time you like die and like reincarnate, you get to experience being better. And to some degree, if you think about it, like DNA sort of passing things down, or like experientially, generationally passing things down, like you were saying, it's sort of that same idea where it's like a great grandfather, right, is sort of watching that and learning in that same way, even if it's through different iterations of humans that are just passing that DNA or that experience along. From a broader perspective, that sort of bubble of consciousness, that energy signature, is watching the evolution continue to get better and escape and become free, right? And that's the point of it. It's a little bit of video game. That's a bit how I perceive reality to be too, as much as I get very caught up in being this avatar. And I do, but I love this topic. I love this conversation. We've come up to an hour already, and I want to be mindful of your time because I know you're busy holding up the entire solar system. I'm very aware.
What does that exactly mean? You guys say that a lot.
Well, because you are. I know that you are holding up the solar system in the way that you have that like mind capacity to put together all the dots obsidian style and know where all the pieces are and like keep them floating in perfect orchestration to each other without, collapsing and crashing into each other like comets and things like that. So
thank you.
you're balancing all of that. And like, I'm so happy that I get to be here and watch the show and have the popcorn and be a little bit the comedian entertainer who gets to showcase the amazing people who balance the universe.
I know we were supposed to talk about criminals, and
we did.
But we did. We talked about the psychology of crime and criminals and why I'm so fascinated with it. And you guys should listen to the murder playlist because it's great. Actually, I would love to my favorite. I want to play you my favorite song. Are we done? Well, no, let's end your song to you because you have to listen to it. It makes so much sense.
I love this. I'm excited. We're going to share your playlist. Everybody do check out the links in the description below because you can find Jackie. You can find Anima. We're going to share her playlist because I love this. Thank you, Jackie, for hanging out on a Haleigh Daily podcast. I do love this. You must come back again. We have to bring my sister so we can have more true crime talk.
Yes.
But you'll definitely also talk to us on about intelligence and all the AI things because these are conversations that I think people need to have around AI. I really appreciate that you're willing to share all of the human elements and all of the tech elements.
Thank
and
you.
Talk a little bit of the wild true crime.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jackie. You have been great.
You too.
Big love bubbles to you and big love bubbles to the audience, everybody. And we will catch you next. Oh, look at there. She's got it.
Oh, green heart.
Oh, I love it. Beautiful. So good.